Hey there, people. If it isn't obvious, I really like the Elder Scrolls series, but it's been a while since it had a new release. In 2 more years it'll be the same amount of time between Arena and Skyrim as Skyrim and TES 6. With Dark Souls, its popularity spawned a subgenre of action RPGs called Scrollslikes. Stuff like Lies of P, Wu Chang, Black Myth Wukong, Neo, Kazan, and about 1,000 other lesser-known titles. I'd say the formula is well known and widely popular, but why didn't the Elder Scrolls spawn a line of similar games? Well, I'd say the formula is much harder to replicate, since in the Souls-like realm, only really Elden Ring has a huge open world, but the Scrolls formula pretty much demands it. First, I want to define what a Scrolls-like would be. Obviously, a single-player RPG in medieval fantasy style, and the argument could be made that some of the more futuristic or post-apocalyptic games could be considered Scrolls-likes. You know, stuff like every other Bethesda game or Cyberpunk 2077. And yeah, I would buy that. Let's see. A large open simulated world with lots of exploration and a non-linear story. And by non-linear, I mean there can be a main quest that you can follow, or you can go off and do your own thing. This game would be mainly built for first-person camera perspective, but third-person is optional. I feel like for this formula, first-person is mandatory, and third-person is just a nice-to-have. Naturally, the combat doesn't need to be exceptional, but in my personal opinion, it makes it a lot more palatable. And lastly, simulationist role-playing. It's an immersive sim, but this is not really as well-defined as all the other things that I said. A lot of this would hinge on things like manipulating things in the environment, like havoc physics, ragdolling, having a day-night cycle, having NPC schedules, having them talk to each other maybe. The world needs to feel lived in. With varying degrees of success, parts of Morrowind and Daggerfall feel pretty flat by modern standards, but they were products of their time. And it's clearer and clearer that these elements are getting harder to put squarely in this subgenre since we have things like GTA 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2. These games check a lot of these boxes, and I would say one of my preferences for calling something a Scrolls-like is being able to create your own character. But some of the stuff I'm going to talk about does not have that option. There are gradients to all of this, of course. I do want to separate Scrolls-likes from Kingsfield-likes. If you stood the two of them next to each other side by side as a list of bullets, they would look very similar. Kingsfield-likes have some of the same elements as Scrolls-likes. They're first-person action games, yes, but they're often dungeon crawlers, they're slower and methodical, often dark worlds with way less character interaction or actual quests, usually post-apocalyptic, but still medieval fantasy. Kings-likes really share more DNA with Souls-likes than Scrolls-likes, but they're all adjacent to each other. You ever said the same word so many times it started to feel weird? I just said the word like 20 times. I will be stretching the elements I defined earlier and telling you where the games fall short if so, and discussing some games that are definitely not Scrolls-likes. Bonus points if you start the game as a prisoner or from a shipwreck. Anyway, without further ado, here's the list. Kingdom Come: Deliverance 2 is a historical fiction RPG set in Bohemia in the early 1400s. Let's see, it's got a large open world in Bohemia. You can explore the countryside. It has towns and cities with NPCs and lots of side things to do. It's got a first-person camera view by default with no option for third-person, but as with most minor complaints I have with games, you can change this with mods. And during a lot of the cutscenes and conversations, it pulls back to show your character. And finally, KCD2 has a highly simulated world with one of the best living worlds I've seen. Each NPC having their own schedule, their own lives, people react to things you do, and changes in the world. Shit like enemies taking off their armor when they sleep, and if you rob them, they'll not have their armor on when you fight them later. NPCs react negatively if you haven't washed or if you're dressed like a vagrant. People carry keys to their homes and businesses. You can put sleeping potion and poison in people's food. Speaking of which, there's no traditional magic in this game, but there is alchemy, crossbows, and early firearms, which means you can be a blaster of sorts. I'm going to talk about combat because of course I am. It's got first-person combat, but it's kinda strange, slow and technical, and more like stage fighting to be honest. Despite all this, I would say Kingdom Come: Deliverance 2 is not the best example of a Scrolls-like game. It's the vibes, you know, the lack of magic, the fact that it's very character-driven, very narrative-driven, less epic fantasy and more simulationist slice of medieval life. I do still think some people could stretch the definition of KCD and call it a Scrolls-like. More of a, if you like Skyrim, you might like this game too. Also, I haven't actually played KCD1, though I've heard the gameplay is much the same, and I have added it to my to play list. Obviously, I didn't finish 8 100-hour games for this video. I played each one for 8 to 10 hours to get a good feel for it. So I'm going to play KCD1 before I go back to KCD2, since although they're standalone stories, it sounds like there's a lot of context you miss by skipping the first game. Another thing against it being a true Scrolls-like is you're stuck playing Henry and you can't create your own character. So I would say overall it's a good game, but yeah, it might not be a Scrolls-like. Tainted Grail is a dark Arthurian legend-themed fantasy RPG. Wait, Ginnungagap, Niflheim, Muspelheim, Ymir, Jotun, something Aesir? Those are from Norse mythology. Ginnungagap is the void. Niflheim is the ice world. Muspelheim is the world of fire. Ymir is the giant progenitor. Aesir, the family of gods that includes Odin and Thor. Okay, I thought this was an Arthurian legend. Okay, it seems like they just used this song because it sounded cool. And I mean, it does. This song kind of slaps. And they even have the druid demon figure thing chanting the song. Anyway, Tainted Grail seems to fit the bill of Scrolls-like nicely, showing a lot of its inspiration from Oblivion and Skyrim. It even has the same lockpicking minigame as Skyrim, and it has a perk tree, but also with attributes. It plays in first person, says it's not really designed for third, but it handles alright, and it has it as an option. It has an open world with lots of characters.
Oh, mother's tits.
The stories aren't as varied and wide as the Elder Scrolls games with their myriad of guilds and tons of side quests. It's a AA game from a smaller studio, so that's really understandable. It's more of a post-apocalyptic crapsack world like the Souls and Kings franchises. More dark fantasy than the high fantasy of the Elder Scrolls. Though I guess that it isn't technically a real requirement on the list since it does have NPCs you can do quests for. And I do want to say the combat is much more polished than any Elder Scrolls title, an example of first-person combat done well, with a dodge, a time block, and some examples of unscaled enemies that will absolutely steamroll you if you're too low level. But also it doesn't have monster factions or infighting. At a certain point I was fighting undead and stumbled into a bandit camp, and the undead and bandits joined forces, and then I aggroed wolves and fey enemies, and they're all joining hands singing Kumbaya around the fire, joining together to kill me, the one true scourge upon this world. This is without a doubt one of the worst breaks of immersion I've ever seen in a game. Even Daggerfall has this feature. Oh wait, original Daggerfall didn't, but Daggerfall Unity does. Okay, even Doom from the 90s had monster infighting. Get it together, man. Overall, Tainted Grail seems like it's going to be an interesting game. You can definitely see the DNA of the Elder Scrolls in there, but Arthurian legend. Avowed is a first-person action RPG, and a lot of people had way too high hopes for it being the Skyrim killer, and it does have some of the elements of a Scrolls-like. Like the first-person combat with third-person being optional, some exploration. What it does not have is an immersive simulated world, an open world, or even a non-linear story. The biggest thing that sets it apart from the Elder Scrolls is that there's no crime, no manipulation of the environment via a physics system, although there are breakable boxes and such. And you can't attack friendlies or annoy people. NPCs stand around and deliver dialogue, but they're more like mannequins. You know, you can just take whatever you want in front of anyone, Zelda style. It's extremely unimmersive in this regard. That's not to say it's all bad though. It's got good combat, good character creation. You are a destined hero. It has a good character-driven story, although it is pretty short compared to some of the longer RPGs. It has side quests, and it does feel like you don't actually have any choice in the direction the story is going. At least in Skyrim, you can be snarky. Or if you're feeling railroaded, you can literally just drop the conversation with Delphine and go do something else for 80 hours. Or just never finish the main quest. I just think a lot of people expected a lot more from the creators of Pillars of Eternity, and it looks so much like it could be a Skyrim type game. And it was fairly expensive at $70 when it released. I don't know that the hate was warranted, but it also doesn't meet the bar of a Scrolls-like, and not in a good way like KCD2, where it's just different and innovative enough to be its own thing. The combat definitely feels better than Skyrim, and there's a dodge, but the activation is really clunky, by the way. And there are guns, and the magic feels really good, so the combat is fun. The world is pretty fleshed out. It's definitely worth a playthrough if you can get it on sale, or play it on Xbox Game Pass if that's an option for you. So by all measures, it seems like I'm not really doing too great in my Scrolls-like journey so far. We've got a bunch of partials, with Tainted Grail probably being the closest so far. Let's see what else I got. Guess what released in early access while I was making this? Fatekeeper is a first-person action RPG in which you control a heavy tank man who dabbles in magic and is accompanied by his little talking rat.
I would not refuse a sip of yours.
Keep your filthy snout out of my drink.
More like a tech demo that you pay for, it only has a couple hours of gameplay in which you fight these little goblin creatures who specialize in throwing rocks, poking with sticks, and organizing into hordes. And still, John Fatekeeper will struggle to fight them off. Really, once you get the hang of the combat, it starts to feel somewhat good, but it's clunky with sometimes weird hit detection. The enemies are also kind of stupid, but usually not in a good way. They just run at you and don't coordinate their attacks. Sometimes this makes for an easy target to kick into pits. Sometimes they'll be layering attacks on you non-stop, while others aimbot unblockable arrows and rocks that damage you even if you're blocking. So the combat feels kind of Scrollsy, done well, but it's really impossible to tell whether this is going to be an open world since this, what could be called a demo, is pretty linear. And by linear, I mean there's only one way to go with a few things to climb onto and find, but also sometimes it is very unclear which way you're supposed to go. I was never a fan of yellow paint, but I don't mind a hint or two. And I'm not one of those guys who hates quest markers, even though I am a Moro boomer. This is a separate topic, but now that graphical fidelity is so high, sometimes it's really hard to tell what you can actually interact with in games. So that's the reason for the yellow paint, but the yellow paint feels stupid. There's got to be a middle ground. It is kind of impossible to tell if it's simulationist either, since there aren't really NPCs besides the rat you can interact with. At least it has object physics, climbing, and crafting, so this game looks like it could be what I'm looking for, and could be good once it finishes cooking. Also, I really want to have a shield so I can block these stupid rocks. Early access demo is $8 right now, so if it looks like something you might enjoy later, give it a whirl. Axis Unseen is an open-world RPG focused on hunting and tracking large prey, mainly with your bow. I played this last year as part of Bard's Backlog 2, and I can honestly say it checks some of the boxes. The gameplay is first-person, with focus on stealth and detection. It has magic and journals in the wild telling stories of the people who hunted these lands before you. It doesn't really have simulationist elements with no real NPCs to speak of, and it also doesn't have a straightforward typical story. On the bright side, it is 75% off on Steam right now, and it was made by one of the creators of Skyrim and Fallout 4. You can tell they were really trying to strip away a lot and focus on a narrow slice of the gameplay of the Scrolls formula. I have to give it props for what it's trying to do. Devil Spire Falls, not to be confused with Devil Spire, which is a Kingsfield-like. I also played this last year for Bard's Backlog 2. Devil Spire Falls is an open-world RPG with a first-person perspective that heavily leans into the simulationist elements. You can plant, farm, fish, go on adventures, build a house, and survive. The world is procedurally generated every time you make a new game. The combat, controls, graphics, and speed of the game are really janky, but that's kind of part of the charm. You should definitely turn up the speed in the settings. It definitely leans heavily into survival and is really a sandbox for you to play in, rather than currently having an overarching story. I don't know if they're ever going to actually have one. Then again, it is also in early access, but not lacking in things to do like Fatekeeper. It seems very much like beyond definitely being a Scrolls-like, this leans heavily into Daggerfall influence, somewhat like another game further down the list. And the demo lets you play your generated world for an hour and then destroys it. So you can generate a few worlds for free and see if you like this game. I do want to mention also that there are definitely some sounds that got taken from other Elder Scrolls games. I don't know if that's some sort of copyright thing. I'll talk about Devil Spire if I ever make a Kings-like video. And now another game I've already talked about in another video. I made a standalone video about Ardenfall. Ardenfall is an immersive open-world RPG with what appears like it'll have a large simulated world. If I had to give it a label, I'd call it East Asian themed Morrowind inspired Scrollslike with some of its own twists in gameplay. Though it currently only has a demo with a few hours of gameplay, it's got a large cast of NPCs that run on schedules and have their own personalities. The combat plays in first person, with a hidden option to play in third person. Another example of first person combat done well. It's currently in closed alpha, which I applied to, but I have the feeling I'm being ignored. Give me my golden ticket, Josh. Give me my ticket. I'm excited for the full release. The Bloodline is a quote-unquote sandbox adventure. I would say definitely an open-world RPG. Solo developed and released in 2023, you play as a blocky human that you get to customize, who happens to be some form of chosen one, which is pretty in line with the Elder Scrolls, though you know from the moment the game starts, and it's actually more of a Bloodline thing.
He said it! He said it!
The Bloodline has a somewhat open world, kind of like Avowed, though not massive. It has pretty large adventure zones, and it's more free roaming than Avowed. It seems like if Skyrim and an MMO had an offspring, it would be this game. More old school RuneScape than Destiny. It has lots of NPCs, there's a crime system, and as far as immersion goes, it has lots of crafting, odd jobs, side quests, lots of enemies to fight, etc. It has the first person combat with a block and a dodge. I do want to say, point of preference here, oh my god, what is with all these games making your dodge 3 buttons? In the Bloodline, it's block, jump, direction. Avowed did it as jump direction, which is almost as bad. Oblivion Remastered also had a 3-button dodge, which I fixed with mods. Developers, please, if you're going to have a dodge, give your game a dedicated dodge button and allow it to be rebound, because I tend to bind it to a mouse button, so you can have your one hand doing movement and your other hand hitting the dodge button. If you do have to double up, with a dodge and something else, double it up with the run button, not the jump button, which will immediately make you jump and make you vulnerable and make you not be able to dodge the attack that's about to happen. With games like Dark Souls, you have a button you can hold until it's time to hit a direction and then have the dodge happen. Anyway, that's all I got to say about that. I would say in summary, the Bloodline looks like it has the possibility of scratching the same itch as a Scrolls game. Heck, it has shouts, though not like Fusroda, and a grappling hook. And the best part, one guy made this, and it's currently $10 on Steam. Support indie and solo development. Here are some more that are not even in alpha, that aren't even playable, that might be Scrollslikes. Alkahest is a semi-open world action adventure game by their description. Looks like it plays in first person and has a focus on alchemy instead of magic. The fact that they say no to bloated side quests means there are probably quests and NPCs of some kind, but the jury's out on whether it's simulationist or not. Actually kind of looks like it plays like Fatekeeper. Also the graphics.
Fuck you, Todd Howard!
Lantern of the Laughless Saint is an RPG, maybe? Honestly, this looks kind of like a joke. It's got an island to explore, quests to do, says it's inspired by Morrowind, both in gameplay and strange elements. With what little info I have, it is possibly a Scrollslike. Also looks like the entire game is possible to do in co-op, which sounds like it could be fun. Hey, they even claim it's a Scrollslike. And last but not least, the Wayward Realms. Started by Ted Peterson and the late Julian LaFay, was meant to be a spiritual successor to Daggerfall, with updated graphics, a massive world to explore, and procedurally generated both quests and areas. The gameplay certainly looks like a Scrolls-like, as much as Daggerfall fits into that category. And I am very excited for this project, if it ever has any chance of being released. Unfortunately, there's been some drama recently, what with them running out of money, then changing engines and people leaving the project. It has no planned release date so far, no demo. So here's hoping this long-awaited project can see the light of day. Coming soon, whatever that means. I'm going to rapid fire some games that didn't make the cut for this video because they're mostly Kingsfield-likes, and I'll be looking into them for a future Kingsfield-like video. But if you like Elder Scrolls style combat, maybe a little slower, but with a Souls-like feel to the world, then check these out. To name a few, Dread Delusion, Devil Spire, Nox Mortalis, Fly Knight, Hark the Ghoul, Monomyth, Dungeons of Blood and Dream. So, Scrollslikes. The real question is, do you think we did it? We managed to find about half a dozen games that come close. Did any of them really meet all of our requirements? No, many of them are in the right headspace, and a lot of them look enjoyable. But then again, for Souls-likes, I think the minimum requirement is a lot easier to meet than Scrollslikes. And none of them are really perfect matches either. So what did we accomplish? Well, I got to play a bunch of new video games, some of which I'll be going back to. As one final note, I feel like at some point I need to talk about the sort of wish list I have for Elder Scrolls 6. I've talked at length about what each Elder Scrolls game did best, and now I've talked about what an Elder Scrolls game, or a game endeavoring to simulate the Elder Scrolls experience, would look like. So that's a video for a future time. I'll most likely go through the same categories as I did for my Who Did It Best video. Anyway, if you made it this far, like and subscribe and do all that stuff. So long, and thanks for watching.